The pen weighed more than it should have as I held it, my fingers stiff and reluctant. I kept staring down at the paperwork, then back up at my husband sitting across from me at the dining table, wearing that smug little grin he got when he thought he'd won. He leaned back and told me to sign it, warning that if I didn't, he'd drag the divorce out for years just to punish me. So I signed. When I was done, I set my keys beside the documents, stood up, and walked out of the penthouse that used to be mine without once turning around. The next morning, his lawyer called him in a full-blown panic, yelling, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" But to understand how it all unraveled, I have to go back to the beginning. I met Daniel 6 years earlier at a charity gala in downtown Seattle. I was 32 at the time, newly promoted to lead architect at Morrison Design Group, and riding high on years of hard work finally paying off. Daniel approached me near the silent auction tables, flashing a charming smile in a perfectly tailored suit. He started talking about his groundbreaking tech startup, claiming it was going to revolutionize the construction industry. Looking back now, the warning signs were all there. He dropped big names constantly, dodged questions whenever I asked what his product actually did, and made a point of splitting every bill because equality matters. Later on, I learned his credit cards were already maxed out. But back then I didn't see it clearly. I was lonely. I had spent most of my 20s grinding through 80-hour workweeks, choosing promotions over relationships, and convincing myself that success was enough. Daniel made me feel noticed. He asked how my day had gone and actually listened. He remembered my favorite wine. He showed up at my office with lunch on days I forgot to eat. 18 months later, we were married. My mother, God rest her soul, had passed away 2 years before the wedding. She left me 3 things that mattered more than anything else. The first was her vintage Cartier watch from the 1950s. The second was a collection of watercolor paintings she had created over her lifetime. And the third was a handwritten letter telling me to never let anyone dim my light. I kept the watch locked in a safe in my bedroom. The paintings were displayed throughout our penthouse. The letter stayed in my nightstand, always close, always reminding me who I was. The first year of marriage was genuinely good. Daniel was attentive and encouraging, constantly talking about his next big idea. I didn't mind paying the bills while he tried to get his company off the ground. I told myself that partnerships meant sacrifice. In the second year, his startup collapsed. Investors pulled out, and he blamed everything but himself: the market, bad timing, a former partner. I held him while he cried and promised we'd figure it out together. Quietly, I paid off $30,000 in debt he'd racked up without telling me. By year 3, he had started one company, then another. Each one needed seed money, and every time I supplied it, every single one failed within months. Around the same time, I made partner at my firm and started earning $300,000 a year. Daniel, meanwhile, was bringing in nothing but excuses. By year 4, he stopped pretending altogether. He spent his days at golf courses. His business lunches stretched into dinners. He bought designer clothes, insisting he needed to look successful in order to become successful. I should have left then, but I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head, reminding me that marriage required patience and that good men sometimes needed time to find their way. Then I found the messages. It was a Tuesday evening. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. A notification lit up the screen from someone named Lily Wong. A heart emoji right next to her name. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Wear that shirt I bought you." My hand shook as I scrolled. 6 months of messages. 6 months of "I love you," and "you're the only one who understands me," and "once I get my share of the divorce, we'll be set for life." I looked Lily Wong up online. She was an Instagram influencer with 200,000 followers, posting lifestyle content. And in one of her recent photos, I spotted my mother's Cartier watch on her wrist. My mother's watch, the one I thought I had misplaced 3 months earlier. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his phone through the window. I wanted to yank him out of the shower and demand answers. Instead, I took screenshots. I emailed them to myself. Then I placed the phone back exactly where he'd left it. That night, Daniel slept beside me like nothing was wrong. I lay awake staring at the ceiling thinking. I thought about my mother's paintings still hanging on our walls. I thought about the prenup Daniel had convinced me to tear up on our first anniversary, telling me we were partners now and didn't need legal barriers between us. I thought about the 5 years I had spent supporting a man who was already planning how to take half of everything I had built. The next morning I called my college roommate. Rachel Kim had become one of the most respected family law attorneys in Washington state. We hadn't spoken in months, but she picked up on the second ring. I told her I needed help and discretion. We met in her office that afternoon. I showed her everything. The messages, the financial records proving Daniel hadn't contributed to the household in 4 years, the destroyed prenup, and the photos of my mother's watch on Lily's wrist. Rachel leaned back in her chair and told me the truth. Without the prenup, Daniel could claim half of everything, even assets I'd brought into the marriage if they were considered commingled. Then she smiled and said something I'll never forget. After 15 years in family law, she'd learned that the best defense was letting the other side think they'd already won. I asked her what she meant. She told me we were going to let Daniel believe he'd outplayed me, and by the time he realized the truth, it would be far too late. Over the next 6 months, Rachel and I worked quietly. I transferred the penthouse into a revocable living trust, listing it as my separate property since I'd purchased it years before meeting Daniel using inheritance money from my mother. The paperwork was dense and boring, and Daniel never bothered to read a word of it. I restructured my ownership stake in the design firm, locking it in as separate property through a series of technical amendments my partners were happy to approve. I documented everything. Every charge Daniel had made on my credit cards. Every dollar I had invested in his failed ventures. Every piece of jewelry he had borrowed and given away. And most importantly, I installed security cameras throughout the penthouse, hidden inside smoke detectors. Washington requires 2-party consent for audio recording, so I made sure they captured video only. Turned out that video was more than enough. The footage showed Daniel and Lily inside my home while I was at work. It captured them digging through my closet, opening my jewelry box, and rifling through my personal files like they owned the place. One clip showed Lily slipping on my mother's earrings, laughing as she joked that I'd never even noticed they were missing. Another showed the two of them carefully boxing up 3 of my mother's paintings and carrying them out to her car. The day I realized those paintings were gone, I almost collapsed. I walked into the penthouse and saw bare patches on the walls where my mother's artwork had hung for years. I called Daniel immediately, forcing my voice to stay calm, and asked if he'd seen my mom's paintings from the living room. He didn't hesitate. He brushed it off and said he'd donated those old things to free up wall space, adding that they were depressing anyway. Donated. He'd handed them to his mistress and dismissed them like trash. My mother had spent decades painting those pieces. An appraiser might have valued them at a few $1,000s, but to me they were priceless. They were her hands, her patience, her love, all frozen on canvas. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried quietly for an hour. When I was done, I wiped my face, fixed my makeup, and went right back to the plan. Rachel had already prepared a document for Daniel to sign. On the surface, it looked harmless, just a routine agreement outlining how a few minor assets would be handled during our separation. Hidden deep in the legal language was the real purpose. A clause where Daniel formally acknowledged he'd received full and final compensation for any claim to property acquired during the marriage. The only challenge was getting him to sign without actually reading it. Luckily for me, Daniel had never been known for reading anything carefully. 3 weeks ago, he came to me with demands of his own. He'd spoken to a bargain bin lawyer who probably told him he was entitled to half of everything. Over dinner, he announced that he wanted the penthouse, half my partnership stake in the firm, and monthly spousal support until he got back on his feet. I put on a performance. I argued. I cried. I let my voice crack just enough to feel real. And I let him believe he'd won. Eventually I agreed. I told him fine, but said my lawyer needed him to sign one last acknowledgement about how our assets were being divided. I framed it as a formality, nothing more. Daniel barely glanced at the paperwork before signing. He was too busy texting Lily about how they were going to celebrate their big victory. And that brings us back to the beginning. The document I signed 3 days ago, the one that made it look like I was giving up the penthouse, was actually a quitclaim deed with zero legal impact. The penthouse was already protected inside my trust. That deed meant absolutely nothing. Daniel didn't know that. He also had no idea what he'd signed earlier, the document where he officially waived all future claims after acknowledging full compensation. The morning after I walked out, Daniel woke up in what he believed was now his penthouse. He tried to make coffee, but the smart home system no longer recognized his voice. I'd removed his access the night before. He called building management to override it, only to be told his name wasn't on the ownership records. It never had been. The trust owned the property, and I was the sole trustee. He tried to leave and grab coffee somewhere else, but his Tesla wouldn't start. The car was registered in my name, paid for with my money, and I disabled it remotely through the app. He attempted to call an Uber, but every credit card he had was tied to my account. All of them declined. Then he tried calling Lily. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She was busy dealing with the Seattle Police Department, who had shown up at her apartment with a search warrant for stolen property. My security footage clearly showed her removing my mother's paintings from my home. Rachel had filed a police report the day before, and the King County prosecutor was very interested in pursuing charges, especially against an Instagram influencer with a documented pattern of receiving stolen goods from a married man. The police found everything at Lily's place. My mother's Cartier watch, her pearl earrings, the emerald ring that had belonged to my grandmother. All 3 paintings were there too, still in their original frames, leaning against her bedroom wall like trophies. Lily was charged with possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit theft. Her influencer career, built on polished luxury content, began collapsing almost immediately. Brands don't like being associated with accused criminals. Her 200,000 followers watched as her carefully curated image unraveled in real time. Daniel didn't fare any better. He was served legal papers at the penthouse that was never actually his. Rachel had filed a civil lawsuit against him for conversion of property, unjust enrichment, and fraud. We were seeking the full value of every item he'd stolen and given away, plus additional damages. When his discount lawyer finally reviewed the documents Daniel had signed over the past 6 months, he apparently lost his mind. That was when Daniel got the phone call I mentioned at the start, his own attorney screaming at him for signing away his rights without reading the fine print. According to Rachel, the lawyer told him flat out that every document had been designed to box him in. He had no claim to the penthouse, no claim to my business, and now he was exposed to theft and fraud charges. She reportedly asked him how he could possibly not see this coming. Daniel called me 17 times that day. I didn't pick up once. Instead, I was sitting in a suite at the Four Seasons, sipping champagne and looking out at the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Rachel checked in every few hours with updates. The police had recovered all of my mother's belongings. Lily was out on bail but facing serious charges. Daniel's civil case was going to cost him everything he had, which wasn't much, but it would follow him for years. Before hanging up, Rachel mentioned one last thing. Daniel's attorney was trying to void the documents he'd signed, claiming duress or fraud on my part. I laughed. Every single document had been witnessed, notarized, and reviewed by independent counsel. Daniel had chosen not to read them. That wasn't my problem. Rachel agreed. The motion would be denied. I was going to walk away with everything I'd had before I met him, plus damages, and the quiet satisfaction of watching him explain to a judge why he gave his mistress his wife's family heirlooms. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Daniel ended up with nothing. Actually, less than nothing. The court ordered him to pay restitution for every item he had stolen, sold, or quietly given away over the years. That included my grandmother's silver tea set, books from my father's collection, and all the little things he'd taken assuming I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. Lily pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. She received probation, community service, and was forced to return everything Daniel had given her. She also had to issue a public apology. Her influencer career never bounced back. The last I heard, she was working behind a cosmetics counter at a department store, a long way from the luxury lifestyle she once flaunted online. Daniel moved back in with his mother in Spokane. No penthouse, no Tesla, no designer clothes. Just a man nearing 45 with no career, no savings, and a reputation that would follow him forever through every Google search with his name on it. Some people might say I was too harsh. They might think I should have walked away quietly, taken my losses, and started over. But those people have never held their dying mother's hand and promised to protect her legacy. They've never watched a stranger parade around in their grandmother's jewelry on social media. They've never listened to their husband dismiss priceless family artwork as depressing. I wasn't cruel. I was thorough. Last week, I rehung my mother's paintings throughout the penthouse. I placed her Cartier watch back into the bedroom safe, right beside the letter she wrote me, the one I still read whenever I need strength. I sat alone in the living room surrounded by everything she had left me, and for the first time in months, I let myself grieve. I cried for the marriage I believed I had. I cried for the years I gave to someone who never deserved me. I cried for my mother, who would have seen through Daniel immediately if she'd lived long enough to meet him. When the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face, poured a glass of wine, and raised it toward the empty room. To new beginnings, I said softly, and to never letting anyone dim my light. The penthouse was still. The city shimmered below my windows, and for the first time in 6 years I felt like myself again. My mother always said the truth has a way of surfacing, that liars and cheaters eventually have to face their own reflection. She believed strong women don't chase revenge. They remove the obstacles and let karma handle the rest. I didn't seek revenge. I simply stopped shielding Daniel from the consequences of his choices. I stopped covering for him. I stopped paying for him. I stopped pretending not to notice when things disappeared. I stopped being his safety net. And without me there to catch him, he fell. Every now and then, I wonder if I could have handled things differently. If I had confronted him the day I found those texts, would it have ended better? Would we have had an honest conversation about what went wrong? But then I remember the way he laughed with Lily about stealing from me. The way he mocked my mother's paintings. The way he planned to take half of everything I built while contributing nothing but lies for 5 years. No, there was no honest conversation waiting there. There was only removal, like cutting out a tumor before it spreads. Rachel and I still meet for lunch once a month. She's more than my attorney now. She's proof that the women we meet in our 20s, when we're broke and dreaming, sometimes become the people who save us in our 40s. At our last lunch, she smiled and told me the best part of the whole ordeal. Daniel's own lawyer had basically called him an idiot in court. Said he'd never seen a client so completely outplayed by their spouse. The judge actually laughed. I smiled, not because I enjoyed Daniel's humiliation, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. I was never the naive wife he thought I was. I was a woman who built a career, earned a partnership, and bought a penthouse long before he came into my life. I was my mother's daughter. And we don't break easily. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, I want you to hear this clearly. Document everything. Find a good attorney. And never let anyone convince you that wanting to keep what's yours means you're asking for too much. My husband thought he was the smartest person in the room. He believed charm and empty promises would be enough to take everything I worked for. He was wrong. Now every morning I wake up in my penthouse. I make coffee in a smart kitchen that only responds to my voice. I look at my mother's paintings hanging on walls that belong to me and me alone. That isn't revenge. That's justice. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have confronted Daniel right away? Would you have walked away and let him take whatever he wanted? And if you've lived through something similar, please know this, you're not alone. There are more of us than people realize. Women who loved deeply, trusted freely, and learned the hard way that not everyone deserves our loyalty. But here's what I've learned. The same strength that makes us loyal to the wrong people can make us unstoppable once we turn it inward. My mother knew that. She raised me to believe it. And now finally I'm living it. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Claire signing off from Seattle, where the rain has finally stopped, the sun is pouring through my windows, and the paintings that matter most are home where they belong.